It wasn't until I saw the untouched plate on the kitchen counter that I realized they had really done it. They'd had Christmas without me. My name is Clarissa James. I'm 34 years old, a freelance interior designer, and I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in Albany, New York, the kind of place where snow blankets the streets in December like a postcard, white, serene, and deceptively still. I always believed that family was something you could count on, the way the snow would fall every Christmas Eve. It might be heavy, might be light, but it would come, just like they would. Or so I thought. Growing up, I was the mediator of the family, the one who smoothed over arguments, remembered birthdays, made peace between my two brothers, and cooked when Mom was too tired. I was the daughter who stayed, the one who called, the one who came home for every holiday, even when it meant postponing deadlines or working late to catch up after. But this year, something felt different. It started with silence. No group texts about Secret Santa, no reminders about who was bringing what dish. No Christmas playlist from my younger brother, Marcus, blasting ironically early in December. At first, I thought maybe everyone was just busy, but the weeks passed and the silence stayed. Then came Christmas morning. I woke up to the gentle glow of fairy lights on my window, the scent of cinnamon lingering from the candles I'd lit the night before. I walked into my kitchen with a hopeful heart, expecting a flurry of messages, missed calls, an apology maybe, something to explain the quiet, but there was nothing. No Merry Christmas text, no invitation, no voicemail, just a photo posted on my sister-in-law's Instagram, the whole family at my parents' house, huddled in front of the fireplace, mugs of hot chocolate in hand, smiles all around, my nephew in his reindeer pajamas, my mom in her favorite red sweater. And me? Nowhere. I stood there, frozen in my living room, still in my pajamas. Snow was falling softly outside. The world looked beautiful, untouched. But inside me, something cracked. A quiet, devastating realization. They had deliberately left me out. I didn't call them. I didn't cry. I simply walked to my front door and locked it. I locked the back door too, and the windows, not out of fear, but out of finality, out of self-preservation, because I knew what would come next. The apologies wrapped in excuses, the false concern, the shifting of blame. And I knew that for once, I needed the door to stay closed. It was the first time I had ever chosen myself over them. And that apparently made me cruel. They called me that a few days later, when I didn't answer the door, when I didn't reply to their messages, when they came with their explanations, too late, too rehearsed, too hollow. But none of them knew what it had felt like to sit alone, looking at a family photo you weren't invited to be part of, to realize you weren't forgotten, you were excluded. And that was how everything began to change. My earliest memory of Christmas at home is the smell of nutmeg. My mother always started baking her cookies 3 days before dinner. The recipe was her grandmother's, and only she knew how to make them just right. Crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside, with a hint of cloves and love. I must have been about 5 when I helped for the first time. She put me on a chair, tied an apron around me with a sloppy knot, and said, "Christmas is more about who's in the kitchen than who's in the living room." I've carried that with me my whole life. Back then, our house was alive. My 2 brothers, Marcus and Jordan, were always fighting, but it was the healthy kind, arguing over who got to put the star on the tree, who got the most candy from the advent calendar. My father, quiet and methodical, always bought practical gifts, socks, notebooks, flashlights. My mother, on the other hand, made a point of choosing gifts that would make us cry with emotion. Over time, things changed. My father died when I was 19, lung cancer, fast and cruel. I was in my first semester of design school in Boston, and I dropped everything to come home. Mom broke down. Not in the physical sense. She still got up every day, still cooked, still smiled. But there was something missing in her eyes. A light that had gone out. Marcus was finishing high school, and Jordan was already working at an IT company in Rochester. And me? I turned everything upside down. The daughter who took care of her mother, the one who cleaned the house, the one who didn't go out so she wouldn't be alone at night. That's when I started to disappear. Not really, of course, but within the family. Always present, but never noticed. I was the anchor. And anchors, as important as they are, stay hidden at the bottom, out of sight. When Marcus got married, I was the one who helped pay for part of the ceremony. When Jordan bought his first car, I was the one who signed as guarantor because he still had bad credit. But on birthdays, I was the last to be remembered. When family jokes were told, I wasn't the joke, but I was never the one laughing with the others either. I remember one Christmas in particular, maybe 4 years ago. Dinner was almost ready, and the tree was twinkling in the corner of the room. We were all gathered together, except for my mother, who was resting in her room. I got up to call her. When I came back, I heard my name whispered amid laughter. "Clarissa is great, but she needs to learn to let things flow," said my sister-in-law, laughing with a glass of wine in her hand. "She takes everything so seriously," Jordan replied. "But that's just the way she is." Mom number 2. They didn't know I was listening. Or maybe they did. Maybe they didn't care. At that moment, something inside me trembled, but I swallowed it. I smiled, and I served dessert. The years passed. I became quieter, more practical, more predictable, and they grew closer to each other. My presence became a convenient detail, but never essential, like an extra piece of cutlery on the table. And yet I kept showing up. As much as it hurt, as much as I felt invisible, I came back. Because I believed that was what family was. Resilience, forgiveness, deep bonds that time cannot break. But not all bonds are meant to last. Some are just disguised ties. That last Christmas, the silence was just the final echo of a song that had stopped playing years ago. I just hadn't realized how much I was dancing alone. The problem with certain forms of rejection is that they don't scream. They whisper. And we only hear them when the noise of our obligations finally falls silent. For a long time, I confused presence with importance. I thought that always being available made me indispensable. But I realized that there is a cruel difference between being needed and being valued. I began to notice the small cuts in family gatherings. Simple, almost imperceptible things that accumulated like snow on the roof. Silent, but heavy. When they organized parties, and I was the last to know. "We thought you were busy with a project," they would say. It was all kind of last minute. Or when they decided on the dinner menu and had already divided up the dishes before even asking me if I was coming. There was a Saturday afternoon 2 years ago when I stopped by the supermarket and bought everything for a family lunch. Roast beef, vegetables, dessert. I spent hours cooking. Jordan arrived with his wife, already eating a sandwich. Marcus only showed up to get a box he had forgotten in the basement. My mother had lunch, praised the food, but soon returned to her room saying she needed to rest. I sat at the table with the dirty dishes and the sound of the washing machine in the background. It was as if my attempt to bring everyone together had been a fantasy. No one stayed, no one helped, no one said thank you. Another Christmas, my sister-in-law organized an alternative Secret Santa, just for couples. She said it was to relax, something more intimate. I laughed as always. I pretended everything was fine, but I spent the rest of the night wrapped in wrapping paper that wasn't for me. That year, I got a generic candle holder that cost $19.90, and I even heard Jordan say jokingly, "Oh, Clarissa, you're so hard to please, don't complain, huh?" I didn't complain. I never complained. At family gatherings, my professional achievements were footnotes. When I mentioned that I had closed a design project with an important client, Marcus changed the subject to tell us how his son had learned to tie his shoelaces by himself. Everyone laughed and applauded. The project? It was forgotten between dessert and coffee. There was a lunch where I excitedly mentioned the possibility of teaching at a local design school. My mother looked at me, smiled kindly, and said, "But can you handle young people?" "They have a lot of energy, Clarissa." There was no malice in her words, a doubt that hurts more when it comes from someone you love. And it was in this pattern that my presence faded. I was the caregiver, the one who prepared everything, the one who anticipated the needs of others, but no one remembered to take care of me. And little by little, I began to be left out. Worse, I began to understand that perhaps it was intentional. The microaggressions came in the form of jokes about my lonely life. "You should sign up for a dating app," Marcus would say, "or maybe adopt a cat. It's less work." Laughter echoed. I was the joke. My brothers started planning trips without inviting me. My mother would say, "I thought you'd be busy." My sister-in-law would sigh, "We didn't think you'd like it." No one asked me anymore. They just assumed. They decided for me, as if my absence was an irrelevant detail. Until one day, I stopped trying to understand, and I started writing it down. Yes, literally. I had a brown notebook, hidden in the third drawer of my closet, where I wrote down the little wounds of everyday life. Today they all went to the town festival and didn't invite me. Marcus's birthday. No one asked me for help, but they called when the cake burned. Jordan borrowed money, again, said it was temporary, never paid me back. Reading those notes now seems like a portrait of someone trying to prove to herself that what she was feeling was real. And it was. I just didn't know at the time that all of that was the silent foundation of a greater exclusion that was to come, and it would come on the worst day possible. There was a time when I believed that giving in was a form of love, that accepting the silence of others was a sign of maturity, but over time I realized that it was just a fancy way of diminishing myself, of fitting into spaces that were never meant for me. At 26, I turned down a job offer in Chicago. It was a chance to work with one of the country's leading interior designers. When I told my mother, I expected enthusiasm, or at least curiosity. Instead, I got a worried look and a curt reply. But who's going to take care of things here? Take care of things was a euphemism for taking my mother to the doctor, paying the bills when Marcus and Jordan were late with their rent, scheduling car maintenance, preparing Sunday lunch, picking up my nephew when the couple fought and he needed time out. The truth is that silently, I had become the invisible link that held everyone together, and not because it was directly imposed on me, but because of a perverse mixture of expectation and guilt. Saying no seemed like an act of aggression. Once, I dared to cancel a lunch date because I was exhausted. I had worked 3 nights in a row delivering a project and just wanted to sleep. My mother called later, her voice breaking. I just wanted to see everyone together, like in the old days. It was emotional blackmail wrapped in nostalgia. And it worked. On my 31st birthday, I planned an intimate dinner at my apartment. I prepared every detail with care. When Marcus canceled at the last minute saying his son was sick, I understood. When Jordan didn't respond to my messages until the next day, I took a deep breath. But when my mother arrived 3 hours late without a gift, saying she just stopped by to give me a quick kiss, something inside me broke. She stayed less than 15 minutes. And she left saying, "You know these dates are just symbolic, right? Don't be like that." Symbolic for whom? I realized that for them, my presence was functional, not emotional. They wanted me around when they needed something, when the house needed someone to organize it, when the mood needed to be calmed, when a problem needed to be solved quietly. When I mentioned that I was thinking of selling my car to save money, my mother reacted with indignation. But what if Marcus needs a ride, or if I need to go to the hospital? As if my decisions were made collectively, as long as they served the interests of others. I began to notice something that had always been there, but that I had never named. Control disguised as care. They said they cared about me. But it was selective concern. It disappeared when I said I was sad. It got angry when I set boundaries. It judged my moments of rest as laziness and my absences as ingratitude. I even had an anxiety attack in the middle of the night after receiving 3 messages in a row from Jordan asking for help with home renovations. He wanted me to redesign the project, redraw the floor plan, and even suggest furniture, all for free. "Your family," he said. And when I replied, trembling, that I couldn't do it at that moment, he simply dismissed it and never brought it up again, as if I had committed a sin. I started to wonder, what is left of someone who spends their life being everything to others, but is never seen as a complete person in their own right? Little by little, I began to lose myself. I chose smaller projects. I turned down invitations that required travel. I silently abandoned my dreams. Not because I wanted to, but because they wanted me to. And the worst part? I allowed it. I allowed it because I thought that was what a daughter did, that was what kept the family together. But the truth is that a family that only comes together when you keep quiet is not a family. It is a structure of domination. And that last Christmas, when I realized they hadn't included me, it was as if they had set me free. The prison had always been open. I just didn't know I could leave. I became an expert at smiling with empty eyes. On the outside, I was the same old Clarissa, punctual, helpful, willing. On the inside, there was a tiredness that sleep couldn't cure. A permanent knot in my chest, a pain that I didn't know exactly where it lived. I just knew it was there, present in every silence disguised as peace. I started having trouble getting out of bed. The days seemed to drag on, even with projects that had previously excited me. Sometimes I would leave my phone for hours, just so I wouldn't have to see messages from my brothers, usually requests, never questions about how I was doing. One morning in November, I got a call from my nephew's school. He had been sick, and Marcus, busy in a meeting, asked me to pick him up. I rushed out, leaving a virtual meeting halfway through. When I got there, the boy was pale, cowering in the reception area. I hugged him, took care of him, and took him to my house until his father showed up. Marcus didn't arrive until 8 o'clock at night. No, thank you. No, sorry for the trouble. He just picked up his son and said, "It's a good thing you don't have kids, right? You can help us out." I stood there, motionless, with my dinner plate getting cold on the table. I swallowed my tears with warm water. A few days later, my mother called me saying that they were planning a simpler Christmas this year. I said I could help. She hesitated. "I think you should rest this year, daughter. You're too overwhelmed. We don't want to burden you." At the time, it seemed like a kind thing to say. But later, I realized it was just a polite way of keeping me away. I started to remember other times when they pushed me away for my own good. When they reorganized the family group and forgot to add me. When they held a raffle among my siblings to help with my mother's household expenses and didn't even consult me. They just told me how much I had to pay. When they organized the renovation of my father's room, and even though I'm a designer, they didn't ask for my opinion, just financial help. Each event was small, but together they formed a wall, and I was on the outside. One night, I lay down and started crying for no apparent reason. The tears came silently, but continuously. I felt a kind of grief, as if I were losing my family, even though they were all alive. That's when I sought help. I made an appointment with a therapist that a client had recommended. At first, I felt silly. I thought she would tell me I was overreacting. But she just listened to me. And at the end, she said something I've never forgotten. "You've spent your whole life trying to earn a place at a table that should have been yours by right." That sentence broke me down. I started writing again. I picked up my brown notebook, and instead of just listing my grievances, I wrote down everything I wanted to say. To my brothers, to my mother, to myself. I wrote letters I never sent, sentences I never had the courage to say. And as I wrote, I realized that it wasn't just sadness I felt anymore. It was anger. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that awakens. Anger at having kept quiet for so long. At having molded myself to expectations that never fit me. At having been called difficult just for wanting to be heard. The final straw came in a quick conversation in a WhatsApp group. Jordan, as always, was organizing the details for Christmas. He was talking about the decorations, the food, who would bring what. When I mentioned that I could bring my walnut pie, our father's favorite, he replied with a laughing emoji and said, "Relax, Clarissa. We've already managed this year. You take a break. Just don't lock the door and disappear, okay?" Everyone laughed. I read that message about 10 times. There was no laughter in me, just a heavy silence. And it was there, in that trivial exchange, that the decision began to form. That night, I went to my front door. I locked it with both keys. I closed the windows. I turned off my phone. I turned off my notifications. They didn't know it yet, but that Christmas, I wouldn't be the one left out. On Christmas Eve, the city looked like something out of an old movie. The streets of Albany were covered in a soft layer of snow. The lampposts decorated with golden lights twinkled softly, and the smell of pine and burning wood filled the air. But inside me, there was no Christmas. There was no party. There was just a clean emptiness, the kind of silence that comes after a hurricane. I spent the day alone, by choice. For the first time, I didn't put up a tree. I didn't bake cinnamon cookies. I didn't turn on the radio to listen to classic Christmas songs. I didn't wear the red sweater my mother said made me look less pale. Instead, I spent the morning writing one last letter, one that wouldn't be filed away in a notebook. This one would be delivered. In that letter, I didn't blame anyone, but I didn't spare anyone either. I told them how I felt invisible even when I was in the same room, how all the little jokes, absences, and silent decisions made me realize that my role was never that of a daughter. It was that of technical support, of an extra, of a shadow. I told them that I had spent most of my life trying to be enough for a family that only accepted me when I was useful. That love, for me, always came with a footnote. As long as you don't bother us, as long as you understand, as long as you sacrifice yourself. I wrote that this would be the last time I would be away from the dinner table. because from now on, I would only go to places where I felt wanted, not tolerated. I folded the letter, put it in a plain envelope, and left it in my mother's mailbox. I didn't ring the doorbell. I didn't wait for anyone to open the door. I didn't need wide eyes or theatrical reactions. I already knew the whole script. I went home and locked the doors. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was determined. And then, like a broken clock that decides to work at the wrong moment, they came. At 9 o'clock at night, the messages started. Marcus, hey, why didn't you come? We waited for you. Jordan, we missed the pecan pie LOL. Are you coming tomorrow? My mother, daughter, I insisted they call you. I didn't want to overwhelm you. I looked at the messages and didn't respond. It wasn't silence. It was a scream from someone who was tired of being used as an emotional crutch. At 11, there was a knock on my door. First a light knock, then insistent. I opened the living room curtain and saw the three of them. Marcus with his son asleep on his shoulders, Jordan with a box of desserts in his hand, my mother with a confused and guilty look, as if she had only just understood. But I didn't open the door. They stayed outside for about 10 minutes. Then they left. They called me dramatic, cold. The word that hurt me the most, cruel. I was cruel for choosing my own well-being, for not opening the door that had always been wide open for everyone, until all that was left was a draft. I sat on the couch, covered with my father's old shawl, and for the first time in years I cried with relief. Not because I had lost them, but because I had finally found myself. On television, a children's choir sang Silent Night. The final verse said, "Sleep in heavenly peace." And that night, I slept. In peace. For the first time in a long, long time. I woke up on the 26th to a silent house. But for the first time, that silence wasn't a punishment. It was space, an open field where I could finally decide where to step. I had a slow breakfast, looking out the window at the snow piled up in the yard. Each flake seemed like a new beginning. Small, yes, but undeniable. It was on that same day that I deleted the family group from my phone. Not on impulse, but calmly. I left the group with Marcus, Jordan, my aunts who only showed up to comment on photos, my mother, who now responded to my messages with sad emojis or short phrases. Not that I hated them, but it was time to close the channel where I only received emptiness. The first practical thing I did was to resume an old project, my idea of opening a collaborative design studio, a space for independent artists, decorators, architects, and designers like me. Something that could be a workshop and a gallery at the same time. For years, this idea remained in a drawer, like so many of my plans, always postponed because someone would need me. But now, for the first time, I needed myself, and it was the only valid priority. I went down to the basement, picked up my old sketches, and started reorganizing everything. In a few days, I had a basic business plan, a proposal for a space that I saw in an online ad, and even a name, Canto Vivo, Living Corner. It was symbolic, a place that would flourish where once there was only echo. In addition, I went back to therapy more often. My sessions became confessionals and roadmaps. There, for the first time, I uttered words that sounded strange in my mouth, but were true. I am not selfish for wanting peace. I am not ungrateful for distancing myself from those who drain me. I am not cruel for not opening the door. I started writing letters, this time to myself. One every week. Some short, some long. I read them all aloud. I listened to myself. I respected myself. And something surprising began to happen. People who weren't part of my family started to see me clearly. A former client recommended me for a design podcast that became a hit. A college classmate asked me to partner with her. A neighbor brought me cake on my birthday, saying she didn't want me to be alone again. And I realized, with a sweet tightness in my chest, that bonds can be rebuilt. That belonging doesn't have to come from blood. It can be born from mutual respect, sincere looks, and silent listening. Over time, my house filled with other voices. I made new friends. I rediscovered old ones. And, little by little, I filled the rooms with smiles that didn't require sacrifice. My mother sent me flowers in early February. A small card, no excuses. Just one sentence. I don't understand what I did, but I'm sorry for how you felt. It wasn't everything I needed, but it was a start. And for the first time, I was able to say to myself, You decide whether you want to continue or not. Because now I knew. The power to lock and unlock doors was mine. The invitation came at the end of March, delivered by email. Mom's birthday lunch, everyone together like old times. Signed by Jordan. With copies to Marcus, my sister-in-law, cousins, uncles. And at the end, a note. Clarissa, we're waiting for you. No excuses this time, okay? I read that email about 5 times. The last line kept hammering in my head. No excuses this time. They still didn't get it. I spent the next few days debating whether or not to go. The truth is, I didn't want to fuel another absence that they could use against me. But I also didn't want to go just to be the backdrop for a choreographed family reunion. So I made a decision. I would go, but not to participate. I would go to speak and to free myself. On Sunday, I put on an outfit that made me feel strong. Nothing extravagant, but symbolic. The blue dress I always saved for special occasions, and never wore because I was always cooking, cleaning, or taking care of someone. I arrived on time. The house was full, as usual. Laughter, soft music, the smell of roast meat. I was greeted with uncomfortable hugs, the kind that seem to measure how much you're still hurting. My mother smiled, but there was something anxious in her eyes. Jordan tried to break the ice with a joke about decorating. Marcus pretended everything was the same as before, but it wasn't. Nothing was. I waited for everyone to settle down in the living room. I asked to speak. At first, no one understood. They thought it was a commemorative speech. But as soon as I started talking, the mood changed. I came because I'm tired of keeping quiet. I explained, without raising my voice, that the last few years had made me feel like a misfit. That behind every joke, every oversight, every decision made without me, there was a message. You don't matter as much as you think you do. I talked about the pain of being excluded at Christmas, about the loneliness I felt when I saw a dinner table without my place at it. I told them how I felt used, invalidated, disrespected. Jordan interrupted, irritated. He said I was making a mountain out of a molehill, that no one had excluded me on purpose. But this time, I didn't let it go. That's exactly it, Jordan. You didn't realize it, because you never had to. Because for you, I would always be there, ready to accept whatever was left. And when I didn't accept it, I became the cruel one. The room fell silent. My mother cried silently. Marcus kept his eyes down. His wife whispered something to their son, uncomfortable. I took a deep breath and finished. I'm not here to apologize for defending myself. I'm not cruel for closing the door. I'm an adult, and now I decide who comes in. That was the break. There was no applause, no hugs, no movie-like reconciliations, but there was something more important. Respect. They understood, even if they didn't say so. They saw in my eyes that the Clarissa who accepted everything was left behind last Christmas. When I left, my mother walked me to the gate. She said, her voice breaking, I didn't know, daughter. I swear I didn't know. I touched her hand and replied, now you do. And I left, with steady steps, without looking back. I'm not sure when I stopped measuring my life by the invitations I received. Maybe it was the moment I stopped waiting for others to see me in order to feel real. The truth is that, for a long time, I lived according to what my family thought I should be. The well-adjusted daughter, the mature sister, the woman who never caused any trouble. But what no one teaches you is that not causing trouble is not the same as being at peace. Today, my home is different. Not just because of the decor, which, by the way, is more vibrant and colorful than ever, but because of the energy it carries. The doors are no longer locked out of fear. They are closed by choice. And if they open again, it will only be for those who know how to respect what's inside. The studio I dreamed of exists. Canto Vivo opened its doors in May, and since then, has been more than a space for creation. It has been a shelter for those who also needed to reinvent themselves. Women like me, who grew tired of being invisible. Artists who were stuck in patterns. People who just needed a chance to shine for themselves. I got a call from my mom a few weeks ago. She didn't talk about missing me or apologize, but she said she was reading a book about family relationships. She said she wanted to better understand what happened. For the first time, I felt like she wasn't trying to erase what happened, but to learn from it, and that was enough, for now. I still talk to Marcus and Jordan, but on my own terms. No promises of festive reunions, no obligation to keep up appearances. There is affection, yes, but with boundaries. And boundaries don't push people away. They protect them. That Christmas, They said I was cruel. But today I know I wasn't cruel. I was brave for breaking a cycle, brave for saying no to conditional love, brave for choosing myself, even when that meant being alone. And if I could leave a single message for anyone reading this story, it would be this: you are not cruel for closing the door. Cruel is spending your whole life with your soul wide open to those who only come in to mess it up. If they call you cold for protecting your heart, maybe it's because they were used to the heat of your pain. Today, my Christmas has fewer people, but it has presence. Less noise, but it has truth. And most importantly, it has me. Whole, for the first time.